This is Emergent. My name is Reed Summers. I'd like to welcome you to the inaugural first episode of the podcast, streaming from my lovely new studio setup here. I want to thank the team and everyone who encouraged me to the starting line and got me to this point and is supporting me even right at this moment. So I've got a wonderful team in the studio here with me. In this podcast, I hope to explore with you the emergent new ideas, trends, and unfolding events that are reshaping the discourse on UFO and UAP as a phenomenon, as well as on their disclosure to the wider public. And it's my hope in this podcast that we can have valuable and insightful conversations on the front lines of the phenomenon where it is interfacing with that global public. These are the conversations that are urgently needed. This is a large part of my inspiration for creating this podcast. And it's my hope every 2 weeks we can dive in and have those conversations that need to be had. And then with that, it's my hope that we can think through events as they unfold in the world, as they relate to the possible contact with non-human intelligence that may be taking place, but also other world events that may be happening parallel to them, that may be indirectly connected or even directly connected. And as we talk through it, let's think through it. And let's bring logic and reason, caution and responsibility, and yes, instinct and intuition into the mix as well. These are our fuller human capabilities, which I advocate that we bring to bear to uncover the true reality behind the phenomenon. So with that, thank you. This is episode number 1. I'm very excited to be here to share this with you. Today, I've got a 4-part plan for us. We're going to look at the fundamental reality of UFOs and the bigger picture of contact. I'd like to talk about this theme, this idea that's been in my mind of a UFO calling, which is really to say a sense of personal responsibility once one acknowledges and becomes aware that we are living in an age of contact on a global scale. And then with that, I'll introduce myself and I'll introduce you to this podcast. So let's dive right on in. For over 80 years, we have been observing a solid physical phenomenon in our world. This is a quote by Leslie Kean. There exists in our skies worldwide a solid physical phenomenon that appears to be under intelligent control and is capable of speeds, maneuverability, and luminosity beyond current known technology. This is happening now. It's been happening over the last decade. It's been happening since the end of World War II, and it's been happening before that, potentially long before that. This is a very long-standing phenomenon, and it has been captured and recorded by people, by military personnel, government personnel, all around the world for decades. And it has been brought forward more powerfully and more poignantly in more recent times, starting in 2017 with the release of a series of Navy videos with other very high quality, important videos to follow. By my assumption, you'll be familiar with the videos that I'm showing on screen right here. The gimbal, Go Fast, the FLIR video, and then the Mosul orb. So these are just a scratch on the surface of what must certainly exist in the deep archives and the secure facilities of not only this government, of my country, the United States, but of many different governments that have been captured over many decades. And so we are just cracking this open for the very first time. And the public is the one who gets to peer inside. And that is why it is so important that we're having conversations like this about the fundamental reality of the phenomenon, its impact upon people, upon us, and as we'll get into today, what that means in terms of human response. Because we are the humans, by the way. If we're not the human species, you, me, and those watching, who else? And so when we talk about this species of ours, or this theoretical humanity, we're talking about the individual members of that species. And that's you and me. This is a photograph just released very recently of a reported UAP shot down by a US fighter jet over Canadian territory, even just last year. So this is a contemporary phenomenon. It is long-standing. It has been observed by not just thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people. And as we go deeper into the deeper layers of the phenomenon, we start to realize that there may indeed be thousands or tens of thousands who have had physical, personal contact with the phenomenon as well, in addition to just a sighting. This is a quote from Richard Dolan that gives a sense of how widespread this might be. Another key element of this phenomenon, which is barely discussed even by most UAP researchers, is the sheer volume of activity that occurs on our planet every single day. My own estimate is that we are looking at no less than 50,000 genuine sightings of unexplained objects worldwide every year. And so with this, I think we can take forward this probable statement that we are observing a non-human technology that is under intelligent control by a possible non-human intelligence. This is an assertion that I would land on the table on episode number 1. It's not known to be true with 100% certainty. The evidence is still coming forth. The testimony is still coming forward by those who have the evidence, those in government, for example. But it is becoming very strongly clear that this is a probable reality. And with this, we can move beyond some of the other possible explanations for the phenomenon. I'll lean on this excellent slide by Disclosure Diaries here, which accounts for the possibility, indeed it is, that we are looking at systematic error on a colossal scale. We are looking at a systematic deception on a colossal scale. We are looking at real human technology, concealed military hardware, equipment, aerospace platforms that we are mistaking as something non-human. Or we are looking at real non-human technology. And as I look back on my study of this phenomenon, everything I've read, everyone I've talked to, everything I have seen, I am going to stand upon that as my working conclusion, that we are looking at a real non-human technology. And yet, we shouldn't think that this is just a technology, that it's just nuts and bolts and luminous objects and shiny metallic off-world substances that have been, found and discovered and analyzed. These are craft. They are under intelligent control. There is an intelligence that operates them, and we have a very strong record of these craft operating in covert fashion, evading detection, anticipating the arrival of human aircraft in pursuit, and doing all sorts of maneuvers that suggest that whatever is controlling it perceives the presence of the human or the human aircraft or the human military installation or the human on the ground and responds. It is fundamentally responsive. And so to me, that suggests that if it is an intelligence, it has some kind of intent. Intelligence has intent, unless, and of course it is possible, that this is a non-sentient form of intelligence, non-biological, and some people do theorize it might be some kind of AI or some kind of viral microbe floating around the universe that does not have intent. But I would say, as we will discover in this show together, when you look at the entirety of contact-related phenomena, including all of the human encounters purported to have happened with humanoid figures, physical beings, with physical morphology, evolved structures of body, that we are, in all likelihood, encountering an entity of some kind. And I think we need to begin to think of it in that way. This is an entity encounter. It's not just a mechanistic phenomenon that we can take our sweet time studying on our own terms, devise beautiful scientific experiments to replicate and prove to one another that, yes, this is substantiate. This is sentience. It's operating in our world in covert fashion, undisclosed. That's a challenge, right? And I think we need to interface with it in that way. And I think I'm not the only one saying this. Others are saying this. It is becoming clear that non-human intelligence is real, is in our world, and has been interacting with humanity.
Here's the million-dollar question.
I'll roll this for you.
Do you believe that a higher form of non-human intelligence has visited this planet?
Right. So non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing. And there are unelected people in the government that are aware of that.
And so, Carl, that is quite a bold statement. I'm wondering, and I'm curious, how confident are you that that is true?
There's zero doubt.
With that, I think we have this emergent probability to consider that we are witnessing a visitation or a habitation or a cohabitation, to open up those possibilities, by an unknown set of non-human entities who are operating in covert fashion in our skies, on land, in our oceans, for over a century, and with an undisclosed intent. To me, this is what you might call the problem. We need to identify the problem before we move on to talk about solutions and the way forward. We have a problem. We have an unknown set of entities in our world, and they are operating in ways that we do not understand, that we cannot monitor, that we cannot mitigate or control. And this poses a certain degree of risk, especially when you consider the state of our world, which I'll get into in a bit. And so, how can we understand who they are, what they are, where they're from, the nature of their being? How can we do this? Well, government holds part of the key because they have the assets and abilities to study and analyze and capture the recorded movements and possible interactions that have occurred. These state actors in our world have those capabilities, whereas we human actors do not largely. And yet, however, the people also hold a huge part of the key. It has impacted us most deeply. There are many, many people who have had this impact, and that's part of my inspiration as well for hosting this podcast with you all. The government holds part of the key, the people hold part of the key, the NHI hold a major part of the key, but the NHI have not been able or willing to disclose the nature of their activity and intent, and so we have this giant enigma that is sitting behind the paper-thin veneer of respectability and credibility that certain government institutions that have been keeping this secret still possess. And cracks are forming. Individuals are coming out from within those secrecy apparatuses and are beginning to offer a glimpse inside what is an enormous reality. And we'll get into just about how enormous that is in a minute. And yet, as I was saying, it's a testy thing to bring this forward to the global public. It's challenging. The secrecy is so overlaid and overlapped, it's woven in on itself, that to bring this out cleanly and with good effect in the world is no small task, I'm sure, for those attempting such things. And yet it is happening. The global public is turning up from their morning cereal to stare at this on the screen, on the TV, wherever the hearings or the admissions are being made. And what is the thought process they have next? What is the conversation they need to be engaged in? This is a huge inspiration for me offering this podcast. But I'll give you a little flavor of what this public reaction to government transparency and admission of the historic reality of UFOs might look like.
Let me put this out there. What the is going on with these aliens? There's aliens? So what is alien? What's going on? There's aliens? What is this?
So the U.S. government for many decades has been investing a lot of taxpayer money looking into this topic here. And it turns out that there are absolutely technologies that are coming into our controlled U.S. airspace over our sensitive military installations, may have the ability to interfere with our nuclear equities. And yeah, it's real. And not only are pilots picking it up and reporting it, also we've got on electro-optical data like gun camera footage, FLIR footage, and also radar data. And it's not just here. It looks like it's pretty pervasive all over the world now.
So what? There's aliens. There's aliens. There are aliens on Earth right now, and they're doing shit. What are they doing? Okay, so what are they doing? What are they doing here? What are they doing?
So it appears that they're very interested in our technology. We don't know yet. They are very interested in our military equities and capabilities and also our nuclear technology. And these are things that can do things that none of our vehicles can replicate. Their performance capabilities are far beyond anything that we have. And quite frankly, there's not a whole lot we can do about it right now.
So beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you've seen the evidence there are aliens.
Oh, the government's already come out. Look, you have a former director of national intelligence, a former director of CIA, a former president of the United States, all coming out and saying officially, yeah, there's something to this.
You can get a sense of how the global public might react. Certainly not with that level of comedic response, but still, are we dealing with aliens from beyond our world? Well, in fact, that is possible. Yes, we may be. And how would people process that event? How would people process that event if it's much more complex than one planetary civilization visiting us in a temporary fashion? What if it was multiple? What if it was over five? What if they've been here for decades? What if they've already interacted with numerous competing defense entities, state actors? What if they've already physically contacted tens of thousands of people, right? It's just tremendous. And I think it's important to acknowledge we're dealing in the UFO UAP reality with just the tip of a much bigger iceberg. I kind of separate this into the surface, what we all can generally see if we try to, the subsurface, what some can see, some who are privileged enough to see it, maybe they got lucky, maybe they have certain levels of access, and then the deep, which is really what none of us would generally be able to see, even if we had such access. And then the deep, deep, which is the wider network of interactions, connections that whatever's visiting us is connected to themselves, which does also exist. And so I just encourage us to expand out of the fixation upon these tiny little scraps of evidence and, you know, video, photo, admissions. They're important scraps. There's something to hold on to and to take forward, but to expand beyond, to actually step back and attempt to assess the phenomenon as a whole. Because ufology, God bless it, I have my frustrations. I also have my gratitude because the people involved in that field walked a long and difficult road with a lot of ridicule to generate some basis upon which to formulate an assessment with which to iterate forward to a better understanding of the phenomenon over time. And that took a lot. So much gratitude to those folks. But we already have 80 years of an evidential record. Are we going to use that evidence to make any sort of intelligent assessment now? Or are we going to go collect another 10, 20, 50, 80 years of evidence, thinking this is a mechanistic phenomenon that doesn't see us and doesn't respond to us and has no intent, that is totally neutral, which I assure you it is not. And so at these different layers of the phenomenon, there are indications, there is some evidence, but most important, there are questions. There are key questions we can ask at each level now. No, we can't answer them all, but we can ask them, and I think we need to. And here I would propose something of a shift in the dynamic of our engagement with this enigma. Here's a quadrant of knowns and unknowns. And so we have known unknowns, the things we know we don't know, up at the upper left. And then in the lower right, we have the unknown knowns, the things we don't know that we do know. And then in the upper right, we have known knowns, which are established. You could call them facts. And then in the bottom left are the unknown unknowns. We don't know what we don't know. This actually is attributed to Donald Rumsfeld, who came out with this, I think, at a press conference around the time of the Iraq War. So I've adopted this. I think it's a useful little grid. And what I see is we are in this dynamic of going from what meager facts we have, or that we can factually present to the public, because again, evidence and fact are not different, right? Evidence is everywhere. Fact is the aggregate of evidence that has an influence upon the evidentiary requirement of a person or a group of people or a whole public. So your fact may not be my fact, but evidence is evidence. But we cling to these facts, thinking we need to prove this phenomenon to all people all at once now. And when that's insufficient to the task, we go into exploration. We go into the unknown unknowns. A shift in dynamic would be, let's start with what we know we don't know but need to know, the questions we need to be asking. Let's then go to what we already know, the unknown knowns, the things we have not accounted for that are actually substantive enough for us to use to assess the phenomenon. And then from that, go to the established facts, and then ultimately back to exploration. It's a subtle shift, perhaps, and we'll get into this more as we go forward in the podcast. I have a lot of these, by the way. I have a lot of these nerdy kind of graphs and charts and schema to present to you, so bear with me. But thoughtful analysis is one of my selling points, folks. So if you're going to come back for anything, you might want to come back for that. Okay. I'd like to talk briefly about context, because contact is not happening in a vacuum. It is happening within a human Earth context. It's also important to acknowledge, I think, that we are dealing with a qualitatively, quantitatively distinct visitation in the 20th century than what possibly may have happened in much more ancient times. Is it possible contact occurred over millennia or even before the advent of modern human civilization? Definitely is possible. But we see a sudden leap in the quantity of sightings, in the reports of beings, humanoid figures, personal contact experiences. It does not transport back into time on a matter of scale that reflects what we see today and have seen in recent decades. We are dealing with what I would call a unique contemporary visitation event. And I think accounting for that can actually help us understand the intent of the visitors to some extent, because when they came, time, and how they came, how they actually entered our human sphere, could be indicative of a pattern. It could show something about a probable intent. We see NHI entering the world before, during, and after the last Great World War. Certainly a huge surge around the detonation and the use of nuclear weapons in combat scenarios. We see also escalating contact at a time of our technological advances, at the time when human civilization is entering a state of complexity and nuance and capability that, who knows, maybe another form of life could interface with, or maybe that just generally makes us a better looking partner, or a better looking member of some larger organization that seeks to engage us. So this is a profoundly unique time in human history, the last 100 years. When you look at the environment, technology, war and conflict, nuclear weapons, those four major trends, and who comes into the world, right? And how do they come? And what do they fixate upon? Some of those very same things: nuclear weapons facilities, launch facilities, military assets, combat zones, coastlines, urban centers. So there is an overlay, I think, that is plausible to make here between the growth and development of human civilization and the appearance of these craft in these numbers, in this distribution around the world that we now can see. And yet, let's account for this as well, that we are a world divided, and contact is happening at a rather vulnerable time for humanity. We have 195 countries, 60 military alliances, often in competition with each other. There are 110 armed conflicts in the world right now. And there are countless animosities, grievances, disputes, conflicting national interests, and so on and so forth. We are fundamentally a world divided. And the vulnerabilities and flashpoints that could tip our world into a state of tremendous instability are so numerous, almost beyond count. It's almost not even worth putting this on screen, but I'll let you stare at it for just a minute, because whenever I present this to people up on stage, for example, I get a gasp in the audience. It's just a lot. The world is going through a lot right now. And there are arguments to postpone or cancel disclosure, which I don't subscribe to. And there is a push to promote it at a time when all of this is happening as well. I think it's a road we have to walk. It's a difficult valley we have to get across. But to do so intelligently and safely, I think we need to approach the reality of non-human intelligence, and especially this matter of technology, free energy, all of these claims about the beneficial outcomes of taking this presence into our human sphere very cautiously. Because think about it, folks. Let's do a thought experiment. In fact, we're going to do a lot of these on this show. Thought experiment. There's a beneficial form of life. It's watching us, seeing the nuclear detonations, it's seeing regional conflict, environmental destruction. It sees our divided state of affairs, and it wants to help us. It wants to give us technology that would make fossil fuels irrelevant, that would make equitable access to clean and unlimited energy universally possible. Right? Let's imagine that they might have that ability, having the ability to travel between the stars and the energetic potential to make the maneuvers they do underwater and in our atmosphere. How would they do that? Who would they approach with the technology? Which nation state? Which global alliance? Governed by which nation state? Which defense entity? Because those compete as well, even within single states. Which one would get the agreement, the transfer? Which one would patent it, bring it to market? Which university would be engaged to do the additional research or to extract from the technology powerful and beneficial science? Which professor at that university would write the paper? Who would he put on the paper? Right? When you walk down this path of imagining a beneficial saving force from beyond our world, giving us the technology to heal the crises of what you see on screen right there, it's just profoundly more difficult to imagine once you start to think about it, right? Because this is the world in which we have. I mean, it's not good. I don't like it, right? But me not liking it doesn't change it. Them not liking it doesn't change it, right? This is our native indigenous reality as the human species on this planet. How does an indigenous species improve itself? By interventions from beyond, technological, scientific, genetic, biological. Is that how life works? Or are they encouraged to do so with their own solutions, or in this analogy, earth-based solutions? Um, and so we're going to do a lot of thought experiments like that, because out in the field of contact, UAP, disclosure as well, there's a lot of hopeful expectation, wishful thinking, and at times willful negligence of real and present risks and hazards, let alone threat. Threat we can put aside for a moment, just the risk and the hazard of this world and this species taking these technologies into its sphere. It's tremendous. And so we need to think through that. I want to impress upon you as well that contact is going to have consequences for our world. It's not a neutral event. The entities who may be here, being intelligent and potentially not of Earth origin, meaning they came here, means they enacted some form of programmatic engagement with humanity. They saw us or detected us, maybe at a great distance. They made the journey to observe us. They watched what we did, how we behaved. They took in signals from our civilization, which we've been broadcasting out into space. They've observed and learned. You might surmise almost everything about us potentially. And then they engaged us. There was an incursion, a point of entry. I don't know when exactly. It might have been multiple, because there might be multiple entities present in our human sphere. But the point of penetration occurred, and they have been operating in covert fashion with an undisclosed intent ever since. To my knowledge, there's been no effort to reach global governing bodies like the United Nations, World Health Organization, World Economic Forum. I can't verify that, but I've heard nothing of the sort. It makes you start to wonder, what kind of a visitation is this really? How should we think about it? How should we feel about it? And this matter of consequence and urgency is something we're going to be revisiting a lot. And I'm not the only one, believe me, talking about the need to do this.
I get the sense that you're sitting on things that feel like very hard truths. It feels like your existence, like you want to say more, and you feel like you're holding it together, and that's a tough spot to be in. And so, to the extent you can talk about what might be imminent, what is imminent?
Time is not a luxury that we can afford. The time has come. We need to start having the conversation collectively. We should have had it a while ago, but we really need to start having a conversation.
Yeah, right? We need to start having the conversation. And that's precisely my inspiration, which I'll be talking about in a minute here. Why did I do this? Why am I doing this? It's a question I sometimes ask when I wake up in the morning, having been through what I've been through. Um, but this has gotten under the skin of our world. According to what I understand, there is a new Cold War and an arms race presently over technologies of non Earth origin and potentially alliances with entities of non Earth origin. Think about that. Think about that at a time of the rapid escalation and intensification of our technology. Think about AI, social media, big data, surveillance, right? So, these capabilities are landing in our human lap. And we have to think very long and hard about how we should regard them and the entities who landed them here, and how we should mediate and monitor and control the way that these non human technologies are dispersed in our world, because it could have a huge impact. It could already have had a huge impact. If there had been no UFO visitation, no NHI had ever visited this planet in the 20th century, would we have the same world we do today? Would we have the same secrecy apparatus, the black budgets, the purported deep state, right? Is it all nuclear weapons? Is it all nuclear secrets? Is that the only thing that's under the skin of humanity? We don't know. But we need to start asking, and we need to be sober and cautious and responsible, I feel, in doing so. And at the same time, we also need to look out to the horizon of possibility, because the potential of contact to expand our paradigm, to resolve our longstanding differences with one another, and to really trigger the emergent new identity of being human as something greater and more desired than even being of a nation state status or a tribal status or a religious affiliation. There's the possibility to see ourselves as a human family via this event, regardless of the intent of the visitor, whether it's neutral, whether it's hostile, whether it's beneficial. What this could do for us is quite profound. What this could do to break us down is also quite profound. And therein lies the dilemma. Which one will it be? Which path will we choose as a species? Are we potentially on some sort of evolutionary road that has been walked many times by many emerging worlds, stepping out of isolation and tribalism into some awareness that they're part of a larger universe via contact with that universe, or the part of it that sought to contact them? Are we walking some predictable series of steps right now that, who knows, maybe it ends in failure 99% of the time, maybe 50% of the time. But the risk for failure is, I would have to say, tremendous. And this, perfect segue, is why we're here. This is why people alive right now need to be involved in this, because contact has massive consequences for our world. And it needs us. It would be a mistake to misplace the center of gravity for this phenomenon inside government, inside the military industrial complex, to say that's where it's happened. That's who's in control of it. They're the ones. Really? You think that's who the NHI have engaged with most in terms of quantity? Do you think that's their prime interest? It might be us more than we think. We might have more agency than we give ourselves. There may be a seat at the table that we are not sitting in, that we are not even identifying. And so I want to encourage you to see that you may have a lot more involvement and connection to this phenomenon than you may think. So here we stand, 76 years later. Roswell, 1947. Here we are, 2024. A lot of evidence has been collected, a lot of good research has taken place, but we should reflect on whether or not we have been able to come to any kind of solid assessment of the visitation and of the visitors, and if we have been able to respond to this in a coherent fashion. In all honesty, I don't think we have on either score, and this is a major problem. It's not all our fault. There's a lot of disinformation, misinformation, obfuscation of the phenomenon by both human and non-human actors. But I would argue that we have enough in the evidential record over the last 76 years to make a starting assessment of this visitation, which is not a final conclusion. It's simply to say, among all possibilities, these are the bounded probabilities based on the evidence we have that provide indication as to what is most likely going on, which we then go substantiate or revise based upon better evidence collected in more specific ways. But as long as we stay in the proverbial armchair of ufology, sitting back within our human paradigm regarding what can and cannot be, treating this as a mechanistic phenomenon, treating it on our own timeline, thinking we can do and take as much time as we'd like to study it, I don't think we're going to make key progress.
The world is not in your books and maps. It's out there.
It's not the last time you'll be seeing Gandalf make an appearance on this show. Keep an eye out. The phenomenon is not contained within our human deliberation surrounding it. It is not contained within our human study of its outer manifestations. This is a sentience. It is perceiving us, interacting with us, responding to us, adapting to us. We need to get out of that proverbial armchair of ufology and deal with it as such. The phenomenon is happening. It's not happening on our terms. And so we have to look out that window into the wild blue. We have to get out to the front lines of where the phenomenon is interacting with our world. The front lines are calling for us, and that's my major point here. We cannot stay within the cozy, comfortable setting of slow and steady research and theorizing and speculating. We have to get out to where this is touching the human species most intimately, and there are ways that we can do that. You know, fundamentally, I think there's really a problem in perception. It's just like the cover of Ross Coulthart's book, In Plain Sight. The phenomenon is in plain sight. The admissions by former, even current government are in plain sight. The evidence is ever mounting, and it is in largely plain sight, at least enough for us to understand that something is happening that merits serious investigation and consideration. And here I feel like humanity's collective ability to perceive this event of potential contact with non-human intelligence is just severely hampered, if not completely obstructed. Fundamentally, can we perceive what is happening? Can we process that through our human mechanism of sensing and sense-making, of making meaning, and ultimately respond to this at a human species level? It's an urgent need. It's a question as to whether we can or not. Here I think maybe there's something of an evolutionary handicap at play, where when you are the ones being interacted with on the surface of your world, and your paradigm does not account for the possibility of other intelligent life in your world, beyond your world, those visiting you can do whatever they wish. They can operate in whatever manner they would like, and the native species, the ones on the ground, will be so delayed in perceiving the visitation, in perceiving the visitor, and ultimately responding to it. I wonder if this plays out among emerging worlds out in the universe at large. As they're visited, their paradigm does not account for visitors, does not account for other intelligent life, but for those visiting, it most certainly does. They detected such worlds, such species. They made a plan to visit and ultimately to monitor, possibly to intervene in some fashion. We are in their paradigm. They are not in ours. And I think there might be some kind of evolutionary handicap at play here that is disabling our perception of the event taking place. I'd like to turn to this idea that came to mind for me a few months ago of a UFO calling, which is really to say a sense of personal responsibility that stems from a connection to this phenomenon, and that also arises naturally when you become aware that we may be living in an age of contact at a planetary scale. And I've experienced this calling, and I'd like to share my story with you and get into what this might be like for all of us. And before I do so, I just want to share that I've been enjoying reading this book by J. Allen Hynek. I was impacted by the title initially, struck by how a scientist, an academic, a member of government programs to study UFOs would take interest in the experiential, the experience that's been had by many, many people. And as you open the book, you'll kind of discover that the UFO experience, by definition, by Hynek's definition, is what is inside a UFO report. And a UFO phenomenon is the convergence or the summation of report and experience. Makes sense? But as you look deeper into J. Allen Hynek's life, you see a man who is personally and authentically deeply interested in the experiences that people have had, and struck that as they report them, this is a person accounting or making an account of something that they feel and believe and perceived happened. It was an actual experience. And for much of his life, as far as I can see, he took a strong interest in this. He listened to common people deeply. He took a real interest in what had happened to them and how it was affecting them even in the present. And I'm struck by that because, again, we can regard this phenomenon at many different levels. We can regard it theoretically. We can regard it at the level of nuts and bolts, just the plain physical nature of craft and technologies and metals and things that have been recovered. But then there's also the human being that perceived it and its effect on them. And I think that's a really important dimension of that. And that, to me, might lead ultimately, for those affected, to something of a calling or a sense of personal connection that involves one in the phenomenon. Because when you have a powerful experience, I think it forms that connection that cannot easily be broken, that cannot be debased or disagreed with. It's fundamentally there due to the experience. And if you can acknowledge that connection and move in the direction of it, it might yield a relationship. Connection may then lead to relationship. And with relationship comes a sense of direction in involvement, which is purpose or calling. And so for some of us who have had an experience, built a connection, maybe might experience a relationship to this phenomenon, there might be a sense of that calling present. And I would invite you to consider if that's true for you. Do you have a relationship with this phenomenon? As it moves, does something in you move? As the disclosure of this to the public takes place, how does that impact you? And very importantly, as we will see in the coming years, as the public responds and comes into some awareness of this phenomenon, how does that impact you? What does that call out of you? Does it get you up out of the armchair, moving in some way? I invite you to consider that for yourself. But let me also share, I don't think this is easy necessarily to acknowledge such a relationship, let alone such a calling. I think there is a significant approach avoidance to such things, and I have definitely experienced that myself. I have been connected to this for a long time. I have been unknowingly in relationship, and then later knowingly in relationship, but across all of that, even to this day, I experience a significant approach avoidance, or even maybe an approach aversion to the topic. And I think that's for multiple reasons. I think it's the topic itself. It is inherently discomforting, disquieting. It is unsettling based upon the paradigm that we all function within every day, myself included. There is serious risk and hazard that gives rise to concern as to how this will affect our world. Who are the entities involved? What impact are they having? What impact is our reaction to them having? That's uncomfortable. But also, I think when you touch something that really has your name on it and that's going to require things of you outside of what or beyond what you might normally want to give, outside your limits and your boundaries, that's uncomfortable. So for those of us with a relationship to this phenomenon, it is inherently uncomfortable. And it implies us. It implicates us in the future course of action that might need to be taken. We're not just interested onlookers, bystanders, people like a fly on the wall, with no personal responsibility in the equation. There is personal responsibility for those of us who have this connection. And I think many, many more people, millions of people, are going to wake up to that connection as this begins to dawn as a disclosed reality in the world. They're going to wake up to that feeling themselves and have to go through that discomfort, process that event, process their relationship to it. And that won't be easy for them either. But look at it, folks. This is life moving. This could be species interaction on a planetary scale or beyond. Somebody has to take responsibility on the human side. Who is that? Can we really hope and assume that that is government, that that is the military-industrial complex, that those are the people in the unacknowledged special access programs? They're the ones taking responsibility, right? Can we make that assumption? I would say absolutely not. We cannot. So somebody has to come into clarity regarding the event taking place and work through the difficult process of assessing the evidence we have, gaining better evidence over time, and ultimately, someday, getting to something like a working conclusion about the entities themselves and what their presence means for us, for human interests, for human life, regardless of their intent, which we may never come to fully understand. But we do need to decode it to a degree to inform our response to them. And across 76 years or more, what response have we been able to make? There is an inherent problem in our approach to this phenomenon. And I hope in this podcast to really explore that and to get out onto the table right here where we can look at it, some possible breakthrough solutions that can enable us not to factually prove this phenomenon to everyone all at once, but to make intelligent assessments that iterate forward toward that working conclusion so that we can ultimately make gradations of response. We can respond to it gradually over time, intelligently, and according to our collective human interest for survival and advancement. To me, that's the project. Which just came to mind for me a month or two ago. I was thinking about, why am I doing this? And I'll share my story with you and I'll tell you how I got into this, because that'll help illuminate that. But that phrase popped into my mind, that there is some kind of a calling to get involved. And when you step back and you look at the event taking place, it makes sense. This is life. Life is moving, interacting. This could be species interaction on a planetary scale or beyond, right? That's huge. You're a member of the species, by the way. You're alive right now. And when life moves, the animals move with it. When the seasons change, when the tsunami approaches the shore, the animals move with it. And we are part of that fundamental, foundational basis of Earth life, life on this Earth. We are intelligent, we are sentient, yes, but we are connected to this Earth system. And we are interconnected among each other as well. And if this event of contact is already affecting the lives of thousands or tens of thousands of people, we're going to feel that. It's going to change what I might call the mental environment around us, or the psychic space. Thoughts, emotions are generating some type of force, which I think can be felt person to person in an extrasensory type of way. Um, and so we have not only a major impact upon human beings by this intelligence, we also have this intelligence. There's a non-human intelligence in our world generating thought, generating force at that level potentially. And so I think we need to account for that as well. And so in the midst of all that, we find ourselves. And I'd like to share my story with you. I may be new to some watching, and I've not really shared my story at length. This won't be the time for that fully, but I'll share more than I have. And it'll give a sense of how I've gotten into this and how I'm experiencing this sense of calling, or what you might call personal responsibility in the age of contact. Responsibility. Can we respond? So my personal journey into the phenomenon began at a very early age. My grandfather was a physician in the European theater of World War II, trilingual, French and German speaker, compassionate man, deeply impacted by that conflict, became health commissioner for a part of the state of New York, and underwent some tremendously difficult times related to that. And into that context, my wonderful mother was born. And she's a very special person. And she developed at an early age this deep fascination with our spiritual sensing of reality, and yet at the same time became aware that our reality contains not just human beings, but non human forms of life, intelligent life. Her brother, my uncle, also became connected, but in a very different way to that phenomenon. Ultimately, he was the primary contractor working with George Van Tassel at Giant Rock in California in the 1960s. George Van Tassel was a key figure in the UFO contactee culture at that time. And through that association, my uncle became aware of some pretty deep level things regarding the visitation and the presence of these entities in our world. So my mother and her brother, they kind of wandered, walked, explored this challenging arena that was so nebulous at the time for them. And but they came into an understanding, an early understanding of what broadly is taking place, and they sought to connect that with the spiritual reality, the spiritual sense of purpose, you might say, or the purpose of one's soul um, to be in the world at this time. To them, that was a fascinating intersection. And my mother ultimately would meet my father, a spiritual teacher and a very accomplished individual in receiving telepathic communication. That's a long story. Don't have time to tell it. But ultimately, he would become responsible for receiving a body of transmitted information from non human sources. And that would ultimately help enable an effort to uncover some of the aspects of this non human visitation, some of the darker aspects, which unfortunately are true, I have to say. So, contact took place in my family, and that was big for me growing up. I witnessed that, I felt that. We became exposed to the reality of psychological influence and manipulation, of abduction, of hybridization, implantation, and all of that. And so, in that context, I found it necessary to develop something of a logical, grounded approach, right? Because it's a hall of smoke and mirrors. All the more so because there are forces, human forces, that have sought to keep this highly obfuscated from general awareness and have seeded very incorrect narratives regarding the visitation and regarding government involvement in them. And so it was a wild and woolly arena. I heard and met and read and listened to much. Um, I went through my own approach avoidance, or you might even call it approach aversion with the issue, because I knew I was connected to this personally. That's a knowing I've had. I am connected somehow to this world, eclipsing its human isolation, its boundedness within this human domain where it's humans interacting with humans only and forever, expanding beyond that into acknowledgement that we exist in a larger network of interacting life. I have had that sense, and I feel connected to the process of bringing that awareness to others, and supporting generally the human species in coming to some sort of acknowledgement of reality at that level. That was me, and yet within this arena of the UFO phenomenon, I had to pick my path and choose my course, and that was challenging. And there was a lot of ridicule from society around me, and I experienced that. I experienced how much ridicule my father had directed at him, and that was very difficult. By the way, my family has no government or military history. We are people who were drawn to this, or who the phenomenon was drawn to, and made an early form of contact with, and had to deal with that and grapple with that and figure out how to hold it in everyday life of raising families and having jobs, etc. So that was a little bit of my journey. My awakening, well, multiple, but the awakening to a sense of calling, the earliest that I can remember right now, in preparation to talk to you tonight, was at the age of 16, hearing my father give a presentation. I think it was a local chapter of MUFON. And he gave a presentation on the objective realities of this visitation. It was grounded, sober, it was eye-opening for me as a teenager. And what really triggered me was the reaction and the response. This was just more novel information, just another little blip on the long journey of consciousness and adventure into space for people. There was no sobriety, there was no sense of consequence to it, and there was no personal response ability to respond personally to that kind of perspective, a logical conversation, the very conversation that we're going to be having in this podcast. It was flat, it was dead, right? It was the 90s, such as it was. But that lecture really, it triggered me because I sensed the scale and the scope of this event and its authenticity as being real. And I saw how 99% of the people introduced to it could not interact with it at that level. But I could. I was different. Um, I was exposed to a lot, maybe no wonder. But it was that convergence of clear perspective of an objective reality and human denial and inability to engage, even intellectually, that really birthed something in me. So that was 24 years ago. Um, I moved on in my life. I actually went into the world and was called into the world more than into this reality at an early age. I went into the post 9/11 Middle East right out of high school, essentially weeks after, maybe a few months, and ultimately traveled, worked in 40 countries, experienced a lot of the world, a lot of the third world, a lot of the post-colonial third world, and gained for myself some real insight into the state of things and how they became the way they are, um, and the condition that we bear as a species right now. But also, because I was aware of the reality of visitation at a very early age, I had that conversation with a lot of people. I had it I had it in the souk in Tehran. I had it in the home of a clerical imam in in northern Syria. I had it in Thailand, in Cambodia, with people all over the world, in many continents. And I guess I felt out for myself early on, what is it like to talk about this with people? How do they respond? What is it like for them? What is their paradigm? Can I feel that? Could I imagine stepping into it and being as local as they are? Right? I adopted that ability to do that somehow. I don't know how. I think I had so much culture shock it blew out of me my former culture, which of course I still have. I'm an American, you know, full disclosure. But I stepped into many different settings and lived for a moment, for a week, for a month, like they did. And I talked about this issue with a lot of people. And in this podcast, I look forward to bringing forward some of those anecdotes, some vignettes that might be indicative of how the human species engages with this in many different cultural, religious, political, and certainly economic settings. And I look forward to the engagement with you all and you know and doing that in the present as well. So that was my time in the world, and ultimately I worked for over a decade at a federally funded research lab here in Colorado, focusing on supporting scientists in their communication efforts on climate and atmospheric science, working in broadcasting and media production. I left that career last year, actually, because of a sense of calling. And this is what I want to get into with you all, because events are moving. Something is afoot with this issue. And for those of us who are connected to it, possibly for our whole lives, or maybe recently, maybe since 2017, maybe just in the last year or two, I'd like to explore that connection. Why is that? What is speaking to us from the world? Because in my experience, I've tried to turn away from this issue. I have not wanted to engage. I see how fraught it is with disinformation and speculation and conflict and all of it, right? And I would much rather personally do things of a more grounded nature in my life. And yet it calls to me. And here I am. And, you know, I think that for me culminated definitely in leaving my career to focus on this work partially last year. But late last year, I had a very unique experience, and I'll share this with you. Open it wide up. I don't know. Maybe somebody else is having this experience out there. I was watching the headlines on the UAP disclosure efforts. I was seeing what was being said. I was looking at Twitter a little bit, hopefully not too much. And there was this sense that the world needed me. It needed to hear what I had to say in the way that I could say it. That's what it was like. And it was a sense of almost something reaching out to me, a sense of almost a cable line that right to my heart that had been slack for years, right? It's almost like, well, you don't feel it. You don't know you're connected to something because it's not tugging on you. And then it tugs, and then it tugs hard. And it's like, wow, I'm connected to this. That to me is this idea of a UFO calling. It's not really about UFOs, right? That's the vehicle. Who's the entity? What's the network of life? What's the exosystem, right? What's the human journey going into this? It's really much bigger. And I invite you to consider that for yourself. If you've felt connected to this for a long time or for just a brief period, what is the nature of that connection? What is the need? Is there a need to know? Is there a need to do? Is there a need to connect with others? What is the need in you? And with that, what is the will to do so? Because as you step into arenas like this, you're going to experience challenges, resistance, opposition, if you're doing the right thing. And so you'll have to have something of a will to know, a will to do, a will to connect, to push through that. And I've had to cultivate that for myself as well. And in this podcast, I very much look forward to bringing forward some of the wisdom that I have developed going through that, because it's hard earned. And I would like someone other than myself to benefit from it. I also just want to acknowledge, in terms of this UFO calling, that this phenomenon has touched people very directly. And you may be one of those people. There may be a record of contact in your family, in your personal life, in your marriage. It may be there. And that can be challenging to face. I think there's a way to do it progressively. And I think there's benefit in doing that. And we'll get into that as we roll forward. But yeah, this is what it means possibly to start to respond to events unfolding as they relate, not just to a strange paranormal phenomena, a curiosity or a novelty. No, this is central and fundamental. This is altering our world. It will have consequences that have real outcomes, and it needs the involvement of people. And we cannot fork that responsibility over to authority figures, to government, etc. It sits with us partly because we are the human beings, you and us, you and me. And so I invite you to just feel that out for yourself. What is your unfolding story with this? Where is it taking you? How does it connect to you fundamentally? And we'll be exploring many themes related to that in forthcoming podcasts. With that, we're about at time. I know we had some tech issues, so thanks for sticking with me. We'll work out those kinks and have a solid one, a nice knock out of the park next time around. Before we go, I just want to introduce you to this podcast. What am I doing right now? It's a great question. I'm still figuring it out myself. This is a very new chair and table to be sitting at, and it still feels like a new topic to be talking about. So getting used to it. But this podcast is really my inspiration to go right to the front lines of where the phenomenon is impacting the human species and interfacing with the global public. This word emergent, well, it's perfect because this podcast is emergent in every sense of the word. If I go to some definitions of that from Cambridge, starting to exist or to become known, yes, contact. An emergent property of a complex system that does not belong to any one part of that system on its own, but that happens as a result of parts of the system interacting. Interesting. Yes. What we're going to see in the world that results from contact or disclosure of contact will be emergent, an emergent set of properties in every aspect of human life, every discipline of science, every field of human knowledge is going to have to rejigger itself and reassess its fundamental foundations in light of this event. It's an emergent set of properties that are coming into being. If I go over to the Merriam-Webster, arising unexpectedly, calling for prompt action, arising as a natural or logical consequence of, newly formed or prominent. So this is my inspiration for this show. I've styled it, I've created it to be a platform for this logical, grounded conversation to take place among common people, because that's who I am. I'm not the world's foremost expert on anything. I'm hardly the most intelligent person walking around in my own, even in my own life. I am a person who has been looking at this for a long time, who has been touched by it, and who feels called into it, and to think through it, and to ultimately act upon it. And so if you're one of those people, I welcome you to this space. I hope it's something of a watering hole for those who want to take this sober approach, who want to move with events, think through evidence as it comes forward, and fundamentally play a part, play their part. Pick up a pitchfork and fork some hay and make a difference in this effort to bring the global public in. And with that, before I go to the kind of the final links and dates and so forth, the logistics, I just want to drop this one recommendation to you. Call it a call to action. It's something I've done a lot, and I think it's something we all need to do. This conversation that we're going to be having, go out there and have it. Go talk to some person that you meet randomly, introduce them to this, and I'll give you a wonderful starting line to help the conversation move forward. And again, this has to be true for you, and it would stem from, again, this sense of a calling, which is I'm working on UAP disclosure, bringing transparency to the possibility that we are interacting with non-human intelligence. Say that, see what happens. Pretty interesting, the conversations you can have. I think we need to have them out there to understand the conversations we need to be having in here. We can't just be having our own little niche conversation deep in an interest group around UFOs. We've got to get out to the front lines where the phenomenon is interfacing with the public and the public is interfacing with the phenomenon. That's where people are needed. And it's my hope that you, myself, we can engage in that here, but that we can take it out. So I'll talk about that practice or activity next podcast, because I've had some very interesting experiences doing that with people, very promising ones, actually. And I'll share that with you. Looking at how the show will work. Initially, in these first few episodes, it's going to be me, solo operator, talking to you and laying the groundwork for what I hope is a very fruitful conversation with others. And in time, I do hope to bring on guests, even panels of guests, and really talk through the most important issues, the core questions, the controversies, even the issues of greatest debate as this moves beyond simply a UFO community and goes into the public. So I look forward to that. I'll be each week bringing forward some video, imagery, things I think that are the most important for us to be looking at and that I'm looking at and would like to share with you. So I hope to keep each show a mixture of me talking, others talking, important things in the world happening, and move through it that way. In the next episode of Emergent, we're going to look at ways we can break through the barriers to the conversation around this phenomenon and look at the kind of new UFO conversations that we really need to be having. We'll be talking about this dialogue that took place recently between Lou Elizondo and the host of American Alchemy, Jesse Michaels.
Let's say there's a technology now, there's a toy that there's 12 kids in the sandbox, but there's only one toy, right? This toy has the ability to let everybody play together and be nice. The problem is human nature is such that most kids, most governments in this case, using it as an analogy, are going to want that toy for themselves. The world is on fire. Doesn't matter what side of the argument you're on. I think we can all agree that the world is a very dangerous and violent place right now, right? This technology has the chance to either bring us together or completely rip us apart once and for all, right? Like there's no coming back. How do you solve that problem?
It's a very hard problem to solve, but
It's only the hardest problem to ever.
you have to raise people's consciousness in step with slow dissemination of the thing or something. But
How do you stop that temptation? Because all it takes is one selfish kid to ruin it for the rest. Remember, one kid. No, it's my toy.
Probably just show them the good ways in which this technology could be used before you even just tell them that it exists.
Who does that? Who's going to take the moral high road and say, I give to you this technology and you shall use it for peaceful means? Who has that moral authority? Who's trusted enough in the world to do that and to say, you will use it for this, but not for that? Who?
I think it's probably going to be just a collective move and something that is like an emergent property of a lot of good people with good minds and good hearts coming together to.
Who is that? The United Nations?
I think it's
Is it society writ large?
Well, this maybe the NHI, maybe the entities themselves. I mean, we were with James Fox the other week in Austin, great guy, and I was talking to him, and he was like, I'm making all these documentaries, and the thing that has come up after decades of doing research on the UFO subject, whenever I'm about to find smoking gun proof of UFOs, I have, a video here, a picture here, an amazing eyewitness, the thing disappears. There's some like ephemeral, bizarre thing about that. And then if we're talking about the nuclear connection as well, it's almost like there is counter intel on the part of the NHI themselves, where it's like mass surveillance, and it is there right when it needs to be there, and things will disappear. And it's our most precious assets. It's our nuclear assets. They'll get by our most intense encryption from the NSA. And so my answer to that would be like, it's like the three-body problem. They know we're going to blow ourselves up, so they clamp down on the science, and they're responsible for a lot of the productive science.
Would humanity be okay with an overlord, an NHI babysitter?
What?
Is that freedom? Are you really free then if an NHI were to come down and say, okay, folks, this is a reality, ha ha ha, we've been kind of playing with you a little bit, but here's reality, you're all going to play well with each other, you're all going to be able to enjoy this free energy and whatnot, but you're going to play by our rules. Now what happens? Now what happens to free will? At that point, humanity is faced with the reality, potentially, that we're not the alpha species, right? And now that we have to do what something or someone else tells us to do. Is that free manifestation? Is that the ability for us to live our lives the way we want to live our lives or the way we are told to live our lives? But are we ready, truly ready, for the truth to come out? Will we do the right thing, or will we do what we have always done in the past? Always. There's not one exception where we didn't use it against one another.
I'd like to believe that that we will make a better choice. I think.
Can we take a chance? Are you willing to take a chance on it?
We're going to be talking about this fascinating interaction that took place between Lou Elizondo and Jesse Michaels, which I found very stimulating and also illuminating as to some of the key dilemmas that stand in our way, not only of disclosing this to the public, but of processing the event itself and understanding the entities involved. So we'll be talking about what these three gentlemen opened up together. With that, I'm going to introduce two more lines of discussion and analysis, and we can have a couple more conversations about that. So the next episode of Emergent is really going to be a three-part conversation, opening up three lines of questioning that are not considered very often and not discussed either in the UFO crowd, let alone in the public, which I think really, really need to be discussed. So it's going to be a fun one. I hope you can join me for episode 2 of Emergent. But for now, thank you for joining me for this inaugural episode of Emergent. I'm going to be streaming live every other Friday at 9 o'clock Eastern. You can go to my website, reedsummers.com/emergent, and sign up for my newsletter, which is going to be giving you podcast summaries, further ideas each week, some interesting links, things to be paying attention to. So I think you'll appreciate that. So I recommend signing up for the newsletter. You'll also get reminders of the podcast and links for where to watch it, so you don't have to even think about where to go. And if you'd like to drop me a line with any ideas, feedback, feel free to do so at info@reedsummers.com. So with that, I will be signing off now, saying thank you all. Thank you for being with me on this journey as I explore both the front lines of the phenomenon and the world of having a podcast. It's very new to me, but I'm very much looking forward to it. And I can't wait to see where we can go together. So with that, I'll say good night.